There I am. Hello, hello, hello. I was wondering what was going on there. I thought I had the video playing twice, but there you go. Anyway, welcome, welcome, welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to VUX World. My name is Kane Sims. I'm your host, as always, and as always, have got an absolutely epic conversation lined up for you today with Sylvain Perron, who is the CEO of BotPress. We're going to be talking to Sylvain all about how he has rebuilt the entire BotPress platform. It was kind of what you would now call, I suppose, in this day and age, a traditional conversational AI platform. And the whole thing has been rebuilt from the ground up to incorporate large language models as the foundational technology that underpins the whole platform. Sylvain and his team fundamentally believe that large language models are going to completely reshape the whole conversational AI landscape. And we're going to get into a conversation about why that is the case, what's been involved in basically completely rebuilding this entire conversational AI platform around large language models, and the kind of value that it'll create, plus some of the key considerations that you need to have if you're going from building a traditional intent-based NLU system for a chatbot or voice assistant, and you're going to start working with large language models. Then Sylvain's going to try and share, or will share, some tips and tricks and learnings and key considerations that you need to take on board if you are going to do that. Before we bring on Sylvain, I want to talk to you very briefly about some of the things that are happening. One thing happening this week, which is our webinar called Into the Black Hole. And it's all about the metrics that matter for measuring chatbot performance. It's in partnership with Wisdom AI, and we're going to get into 4 key things that you need to measure in your conversational AI implementations. It's going to be this Thursday. By the time this podcast goes out, it may well have actually already passed, but you'll still be able to get the replay if you go to vux.world, click on events, and the replay will be there. If you're watching this live, if you're on LinkedIn Live, hello, welcome, and thank you. And you can join that and register that to go and see that webinar live on Thursday. Just go to vux.world, hit the events tab, and you can sign up there. Unparsed is happening in July. It's the world's first conversation design conference. We're going to be talking all about how you can use large language models, generative AI, plus the more traditional intent-based NLU systems, and use conversation design, customer experience design, user-centric design practices and principles in order to create delightful experiences for customers and for businesses. If you're watching this live, there may well be the 50% off tickets might still be available if you go to unparsedconf.com and use the promo code VUXWorld. If that's not available, there will be another deal, which will be something probably like buy one, get one free by this point. So if you are going to get a ticket, you may as well bring along a colleague, bring along a friend, bring along an acquaintance, bring along a prospect, bring along anyone else who you think might find valuable, because it's all buy one, get one free. And if you don't want the free ticket, then you can donate that to somebody who needs it, somebody that perhaps can't afford it, students, underprivileged people, things like that. We are giving scholarship tickets away for those people who can't afford it. So if you don't want your free ticket, you can always donate it, and that would be fantastic as well. So go to unparsedconf.com to find out more. It's going to be on July the 24th and 25th in London. London South Bank University is the world's first conversation design conference, and you need to be there. The world's best practitioners are going to be there. They're going to be sharing the tricks of the trade, the ins and the outs, and the insights that you need to succeed when it comes to designing, building, and implementing conversational interfaces. So do check that out. Now, again, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our guest for today. It is Sylvain Perron. Sylvain, welcome to VUX World.
Hey, thanks, Kane, for having me. Glad to be here.
No problem. Thank you for joining me. It's an absolute pleasure. Very good story you have to tell. So I'm definitely looking forward to getting into that. But before we do, what about you? What kind of led you into creating BotPress in the first place? Where did that come from?
Yeah, sure. So this goes back all the way to 2016. So I was the CTO of a company in the financial space, and we had this software that was very technical to use, and we were getting think of it like a complex version of Excel, but for bankers, and we were constantly getting requests on, hey, how can I do this? How can I do that? Being an engineer, I thought, hey, let's automate these requests and let's build a robot that can answer these questions and do these things automatically for our customers instead of us having to do that all over again. But that was 2016, like way before way before chatbots were smart. In fact, that was even before like the bot frameworks and like Google Dialogflow and all these things. So we went ahead and built like our own open source framework called BotPress, which we open sourced in 2017. And from there, I was very surprised. Like we had thousands of stars on GitHub, thousands of developers using it, and we started having like very serious conversations with enterprise customers. And we're like, yeah, this is really cool. We started using it in production. It was like, what? This and you're like a Fortune 500 company, and they were basically requesting like support and features from us. So that's really what like took us from being just an open source project to being a company. So I basically pivoted and like started doing this as a living. So that's how the company started. And yeah, from there we just grew with like customer demand, but we've always been sort of like a developer first open source chatbot platform that goes beyond just like being a framework, but also has a UI for business people. And so think of it like Google Dialogflow, but for like more for developers. So it still has like this GUI where like business people can edit their flow, their knowledge, and their content.
Nice.
So yeah, this has been going on forever since. And I guess we'll get into like the why LLMs, but throughout all these years, there was always this weird feeling of, well, if you're, like if your platform's awesome and like you say you can build like incredible bots, where are they? And I think that's what this has always been, like the big awkwardness in the field. We haven't really seen like smart and capable bots, like up until very recently, like a few months ago. And so we knew that probably the way that we were doing things were not the way forward, but we just lacked the technology. Yeah.
Interesting. So when you began then as the framework, you then sounds as though you began more as a developer kind of toolkit. You then added the kind of graphical user interface on top. Clients started using it, business started using it, started asking for features, things like that, support, and then all of a sudden you were kind of like forced into turning it into a company by the sounds of things.
Yeah, that's right.
and a lot of people have said the same stuff around kind of like the limitations of the previous technology, for want of a better phrase. It's not previous because it still exists and still is in the vast majority of conversational AI interfaces today. But the traditional, it seems weird to call it traditional, doesn't it? Because it's like it's still a fairly newish technology itself. It's not even in production in most companies yet. We haven't reached kind of like critical mass or anything.
Yeah.
But those that have a lot of experience using the intent-based NLU systems have a lot to say about the limitations. And we've had, Nick Frost from Cohere was on here, and he was talking about some of the inherent limitations with Amazon Alexa and Google Assistant, in that because they were built on that intent-based model, when you're catering for such a wide variety of use cases, you're not going to be able to handle all of those things. And it's a constant training exercise. And the more that you train it, the more bloated the data set gets, the more conflict there is between the intents, the harder it is to try and really try and ascertain what someone wants to do. There's other issues, I think, with that particular platform itself. But like in terms of the intent-based NLU systems, we understand the kind of limitations, I suppose. And then there is this renewed enthusiasm for those of us and you who have been kind of really into the kind of NLP space over the last 5 years. We know that the GPT series of APIs and large language models in general are not anything particularly new, but ChatGPT has given everyone a bit of a kind of an awakening, especially people that are not involved in AI whatsoever. So when was it that you thought, actually, the way we're doing has limitations, which we're aware of, but lots of companies have software that has limitations. Lots of companies are building around the intent-based NLU models and have been doing so relatively successfully for a while.
Yeah.
What was the point where you thought, actually, these limitations are so stark that we actually need to completely change it? Like when was that in terms of timeline?
Well, I think the big realization came to us when, firstly, we don't build bots ourselves, right? So our customers build bots for themselves, and we have like agency partners that build bots. So we, like obviously we use our own platform, and we've built some like low scale bots for ourselves, and we help our customers build bots too. But we didn't have like the hands-on experience of like the daily struggles of like using one of these systems to build like a large scale chatbot, which is, I think, the reality of like most vendors, but like not all of them will say this. But we had to help the government during COVID to build a bot, like to help with this, like answering FAQs for the citizens. And I think where the limitations really, really became apparent was the fact that the FAQs would change on a daily basis, and there were hundreds of them. And for each and every of them, we had to build like the traditional question and answer pairing, all by hand, and it has to work great the same day because it was essentially going to production, and the day after there were like a completely new set of rules and regulations, and things that people would ask. And so we would have to rebuild all over again, and then we would enter with like conflicts between the intents and overlaps and like nuances, and it was very, so like all the problems of like an intent based system, especially for FAQ automation, really, really became apparent. And so we started at that moment, and that was like March of 2020, I think. So at that time, GPT-3 just came out. It was very recent, and it was like the early version of GPT-3. It wasn't as capable as today's, but we turned to it, and we, we started experimenting with this alternative way of, like doing FAQ automation. Obviously, it wasn't perfect. It gave us like a lot of false answers. There were lots of biases in it, but we quickly saw that, hey, this, like this NLG thing could make our lives much easier going, like in the future. And maybe we should start reconsidering how we do intent, or at least FAQ automation. And so this is really what started, like the R&D process at BotPress of like researching LLMs and finding an alternative to Intents, because up to now, Intents has always been like the default way of approaching this problem, and it just felt really wrong to hard code every variation of every question and have like very, very labor intense and not very scalable. And so, yeah, that was the beginning. And for about a year, we developed OpenBook, which has been the world's first LLM based chatbot system that we released a year ago. That was based on GPT-3. It was a highly fine-tuned version of GPT-3, and still used today by like by a lot of customers of ours. But it's essentially a fully controllable LLM-based question answering system, which pre-ChatGPT was by far the best system that you could get to answer questions. Nowadays with ChatGPT, I think everybody's expectations of like the how natural the answers are went way up, and so OpenBook might seem a bit robotic, but that was on purpose. Like OpenBook would never ever say something that wasn't factual and accurate based on your knowledge basis, right? And so, yeah, that's how we started.
Interesting. So you began that in 2020 through necessity, by the sounds of things, and then began sort of like researching it a bit more. OpenBook, would you say that OpenBook was kind of like your first kind of like publicly first public kind of version of what the new BotPress might be?
Yeah, it was, and still is today used in BotPress actually, but
Right,
it's our new default NLU engine. And
right,
so we still use it for intent-based transitions, which we still have in the current product. But yeah, we used it for everything, question answering and intent-based transitions and all these things. Nowadays we use like most of our users use ChatGPT within BotPress to do question answering, because that gives you like a more natural conversation. But OpenBook was really like truly the industry's first LLM to ship like as a product, like a production grade system to answer questions using LLMs. And that was like over a year ago, like months before
mm,
all the hype around these
yeah,
things. So yeah, I mean we've been experimenting with LLMs for a long time.
yeah. It's interesting because like last year there was there was still quite a lot of kind of companies that were doing things that at the time, the way that they would describe it, I won't name the specific companies, but like being able to, if you couldn't classify something, then on the back end, having the capability to be able to say, okay, well, we didn't classify this, but we predict that this is more than likely to belong to that intent. So we'll add it as training data into this intent, and we'll give it to a human just to approve. Like there was
Mhm.
things like that going on. And at the time, it was like, okay, so how are you doing that? And they're like, oh, well, it just knows. Like the AI just knows. It turns out, obviously, it was all based on LLMs. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of there's a few things as well where for things like really long utterances, I know of a couple of companies who, like, in a chat interface, you've got like a really long opening utterance, which an intent based system would have a real hard time with because there's too much variation.
Yep.
But being able to classify that, it's like, oh, how are you doing that? And it's like, oh, it's an LLM. And it's all we just do it. We just do it. It's kind of like a little bit of smoke and mirrors was happening for quite a while. And then now I think like there'll be a lot of vendors who are a little bit pissed off because now that ChatGPT has opened up LLMs to the kind of developer community broadly, now that it's actually
Mhm.
caught on, and it's not a secret anymore. There's potentially a bit of value proposition that's kind of perhaps lost there because now anyone can kind of do it. Well, anyone could have done it anyway, but like now the secret's out, kind of thing. How are you thinking about from BotPress perspective now that you have, and we'll get into the kind of journey again in a minute, but how are you kind of going about kind of the value proposition of BotPress now? Because everyone's trying to build with LLMs. Everyone's kind of building open source tooling and LangChain and AutoGPT, and the rest of the
Mhm.
platforms are incorporating LLMs into how they do things. So, how are you now describing BotPress with that kind of lens and its differentiator?
Yeah. Well, look, this is changing over time, but what we realized very quickly is that LLMs and the NLP landscape is changing so fast on the research point of view that it's very unlikely that a small company like BotPress will end up being like, have a big impact on, and like a fair chance of developing our own LLMs. This just didn't make sense to us. And so, what is still going to be true though in 5 years is that these LLMs will keep improving, and you'll still need to do something with them and apply them to solve real world problems. And so, our mission is to make this, to make, companies be able to leverage LLMs and generative AI in general to build business critical workflow in production without having to worry about using, learning and using the latest state of the art models. We abstract all of these models away from the users, and so we think of it just like electricity. Like it's a commodity. It will keep improving. The models will keep going better and better, and it is our job to benchmark these models, to fine tune them if we need to fine tune them, and abstract and do the prompt engineering necessary for any business to be able to build workflow automation on top of these. And so, um, something I think that is really changing fast is that, you know, not only are the performance of LLMs making chatbots smarter, but it's also making the development of chatbots much easier than it was before, right? And so there's this aspect of, sure, like your bot can get smarter, and maybe there's not, you know, as much differentiator in terms of like the end result, but the building process is also really changing quickly. And I think LLMs by themselves will make a lot of the actual platforms that we use today completely obsolete.
Interesting. You mentioned that you mentioned training and fine tuning there. So how do you go about kind of, you've got a platform that essentially can be used for anything. So if I'm an insurance company, I could use it. If I'm a bank, I could use it. If I'm a retailer, I could use it. If I'm a university or government, any company could use it. Whereas most of the time when we talk about fine tuning, we talk about tuning a language model to a specific domain or a specific set of data. And so, for example, if you are an insurance company and you have a big knowledge base, you could fine tune an LLM on that knowledge base to retrieve and summarize and do things like that. When you talk about fine tuning from a platform perspective, what do you mean when you say fine tuning? Are you doing some kind of fine tuning to enable the platform to have more kind of like generalistic capabilities for different types of businesses, or are you talking about fine tuning for specific kind of industry verticals?
For certain capabilities, I'll give you an example,
Yeah.
and you know, like this might be completely useless in like a couple of months, but we it is changing so quickly that, you know, like there are fewer and fewer reasons why you would fine tune, right? Like as
Right.
these models get more and more capable, the prompting gets, you know, like you have more knobs open to you, so that like foundations model get more and more useful, and there's fewer reasons for you, you know, to fine tune these models. But up to like a year ago, we were running at quota, maximum quota on several OpenAI accounts all at once, generating data sets to fine tune smaller versions of GPT-3 to do very specific things, because turns out that Babbage is incredibly cheap compared to DaVinci, right? Which is
Mm.
like the high, like DaVinci is like the highest, like the highest number of parameters. It's 173 75 billion parameters. And then you have Babbage, which I believe is 1.3 billion parameters. And the
Right.
pricing is like really good compared to the performance that you get if you do supervised fine tuning on top of it. And so turns out we had a hack where, okay, well, let's have DaVinci generate a bunch of data to classify, say, the sentiment of a sentence. And so we would generate like hundreds of thousands of utterances based on like a lot of industries, a lot of use cases, and, you know, like a lot of languages. And then we would fine tune Babbage on that more specialized data set. And this is what, you know, is now powering the BotPress sentiment analysis model, which costs basically $0. You know, like it's very cheap, it's very fast, it's very efficient. So like that's what I mean by fine tuning. So we fine tune these models on very specific tasks. Now I don't know to what extent this will still be relevant, because like these models, the foundation models get cheaper, faster, and better, to the point where we probably won't have to care about cost and speed of inference in a few months time.
Interesting. Interesting. Shout out to JP who says waves. Hello, wave back. Shout out also to Marina who says thank you for the amazing insights. Definitely, thank you, Sylvian. Definitely. All right, so yeah, that kind of sounds to me like it might be one of the learnings that you've had, which is how to use the power of the larger models to then retrain a smaller model, so that then you're kind of like long term you're using the smaller model rather than the larger model. What other kind of like learnings did you find as you were going through this process of transitioning to a kind of an LLM first platform? Anything in particular?
Well, every time we would, just to give you a bit of context, we were doing our own ChatGPT in November when it got out. We were actually working on exactly ChatGPT. So we had, and we still have, like a local version of ChatGPT that works almost exactly the same, right? That we fine tuned, and it took us months and like hundreds of thousands of investments in terms of like credits and research. And turns out, OpenAI just, like they released ChatGPT, and we were like, good. Now there's an appetite for it, and we have like a private model we can sell, and it's super cheap and it's fast, much faster than ChatGPT was. And then they released Turbo, the API, which had exactly the same price as we have been working on getting out the door. And we are like, well, fuck that. Yeah, I'm sorry for the swear, but we're
That's
like,
all right.
okay, yeah, like this is going so fast that like we should stop doing the fundamental research and the training, and we should just focus on yeah, we should probably focus on delivering this experience at scale to people, knowing where these things are going. Like, here are the things that we expect will happen in the next couple of months, and let's build a platform now so that when these things come out, the product will be ready for business, like critical business application of these things. Because today you still have like a fair amount of prompt engineering skills that you need, way less than you had like a year ago, but you still need a lot of prompt engineering to get
Mm.
things working. We like for every model that we developed, we bashed our head in the walls so many times. But now, I mean, prompt engineering is getting so good, and I think like one of the biggest insight, I think, is fine tuning might um, completely disappear for prompt engineering, given large enough context sizes and probably more precise knobs that will come out. I don't want to advance myself, but I'm pretty sure that you'll have like GPT-4 level capability with like 100K context size, with the price and speed of the current Turbo API within the next 2-3 months, right?
Mm.
Given that the things you can build are completely mind-blowing, way ahead of like everything that like all the platforms you've seen. You could do really, really amazing things, and I think we can get past human performance on customer support, but on so many other workflows. So which platform do you need? What capabilities would you expect from your platform given those advances? And that's exactly what
Mm.
we're working on today. Turns out that customer support is really not a difficult task to automate. I'll say this bluntly, but um, this has been the holy grail of use cases, because you're spending probably hundreds of millions of dollars a year on customer support, and it is quite easy to automate, given you're not using intents, given that you're using like LLMs and that you trust and they're predictable, and like all these sort of problems are going away, which they 100% are. Uh, so what is like what other use cases um, will people focus on? So I think if you think of businesses today, there's a lot of humans required in any given business to run the operations. And while we still we have digitized almost everything inside companies, the one thing that we just couldn't automate with with software up to now is human communication and human orchestrated processes.
Mm.
Standard operating procedures, requesting for approvals, right? Decision making, um, ingesting market insights and taking, decisions and strategic decisions based of that. All these things still require humans. But these are the type of workflows, involving more than one human and communicating and ingesting knowledge over like different channels. These are the challenge that we're currently solving at BotPress. And these are really, really challenging ones compared to customer support automation. But we want to know that our platform can actually do these more complex use cases. And if we can do that, then customer support, will be extremely easy.
Mm. Interesting. So it sounds as though you're referring there more towards kind of like process automation and workflow automation, which does affect customer support because a lot of the times, you know, I think a lot of people start with like a question answer FAQ kind of chatbot or whatever, but most of the time those FAQ bots they're just part of a bigger process. If someone needs to know what's your refunds policy, it's probably because they're considering a refund. It might be because they want to ask for a refund and then they need to wait for the refund or have a decision made about whether you allowed that refund or not, then wait
Yep.
for the refund to hit the bank and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, there's a journey that happens before that, which is the purchase in the first place. And so everything's part of a much bigger journey and everything has got a process behind it. And so for me, it's all kind of the same stuff when I talk about this kind of stuff. I talk about kind of like process automation on the back end to deliver better value and better services on the front end, and those two kind of go hand in hand. So I'm wondering if there's any kind of like specific processes that you think that can be enhanced by LLMs, which as you say are not specifically like customer support sort of use cases. Is it more internal stuff, IT, HR, that
Yeah.
kind of stuff? Like,
Well, every use case that you would traditionally would consider not worth the investment, because
mm,
building a chatbot requires a lot of effort, very technical resources, and it has to be a project, right? And if you see, like the use of Zapier today, Zapier is used with very large enterprises, but obviously they're not used in business critical applications. If you take, for example, American Express, right? I don't think that they would use Zapier to synchronize, like transactions of your credit card within databases. But for everything that isn't business critical, then Zapier is a wonderful tool.
mm,
To automate these use cases. So the long tail of use cases and workflows that you can automate is really going to be worthwhile with GPT based workflow automation platforms like BotPress. And
mm,
so that is one thing that we are very interested about. But the other thing, just maybe to double click on that customer support use case where you say, yeah, well, it's probably part of a larger business process. And I think we need to remember, I think today, that what we're really trying to do is trade off speed and cost for the performance and level of automation that you can get. Because if you didn't care about speed and cost, what you could essentially do is make all the API calls possible, to retrieve the customer's order number and to, like get all the data possible about, the current situation of the customer, and do potentially 100 different calls to ChatGPT to figure out and to refine what the next best action is, right? And so that would probably cost like $10, and
mm,
that would take a very long time to respond. And so, but that would be possible. So currently, today, with the technology that we have, you can be automating uh, at an extreme level and probably beyond human level your customer support. Although this probably wouldn't make financial sense and wouldn't provide like that much of a good customer service experience because of the long time it would take between each interactions, right? But in 6 months time, these things are going to be gone. These bottlenecks are being solved right now by virtually all the Silicon Valley startups. The models are getting better. The infrastructure and inference architecture are getting better. There are ASICs, application specific, integrated circuits that are being developed right now to run transformer based models like 100 times or 1,000 times faster than GPUs can. So the cost and speed of inference will go down to virtually zero in the next months or years. And so yeah, all that to say, like all the assumptions that we have about what it takes to build a bot right now, I think has to be put in perspective of right now, this year, because next year the landscape's going to be completely different, and the building experience will also be completely different, given these new reality of the bottlenecks will basically vanish. There'll be more appearing, but I think we will be putting our effort into like more complicated workflows and business logic than just pure, like question answering use cases.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the promise of this stuff, I suppose, is when you can democratize it enough, um, you can allow that, because a lot of the processes that you're talking about, it might be someone who works in a parking department and all they're doing is they're matching people's identification to a letter of address and then saying, yes, that's you and you live at this address, you can have a parking permit or a whatever it
Mhm.
might be. And so and giving those people the opportunity to be able to build their own workflows. That's nothing necessarily new. If you look at Power Apps from Microsoft, there's lots of other tools that are very similar where you can build your own kind of like low code workflows and stuff like that. You don't really
Yep.
need to be technical as such to do that. One of the kind of there's a few challenges I see though. One is that like to devolve things down into individual business units to try and tackle those long tail use cases is that
Mhm.
you need people with the kind of either you need a centralized or federated kind of model where you've got a centralized team with a kind of hub and spoke where you have people responsible for doing that in every division, or you
Yep.
need kind of like champions in every division or every department that kind of take it upon themselves. Not part of their job, it's not what they're getting paid for, but they take it upon themselves to do it. Lots of organizations in certain departments, certainly in the kind of like more administrative departments where this stuff could really have probably the biggest effect in terms of a lot of the quote busy work happens. um, they're not necessarily people, not this is a bit of a generalization, but in my experience of working with enterprises and bureaucratic organizations as such, there's a lot of people who just turn up for work just because they just want to get paid. Turn up for work, get the job done, go home. And the fact that they've got to copy and paste this thing from an Excel spreadsheet into another Excel spreadsheet, or copy
Mhm.
the data in this email and paste it into this system, is not really something that they're bothered about or even notice. So it's
Mhm.
kind of like one challenge is galvanizing and motivating enough citizen developers with the tools that they need to be able to do the job in a way that doesn't require training, doesn't require experience. Because I think so far the limitations of conversational AI adoption is because you have to know conversation design, you have to know NLU design development, you have to be able to productionize something and deploy it into either if it's Slack or whatever. You need to be technical enough to be able to do that. So we need more tools that democratize a lot of that. But even bigger challenge from a pure technology perspective, and this is probably a question that a lot of people will have because I'm sure you get asked this all the time as well, is that ChatGPT gets things wrong. You
Mhm.
know, the GPT APIs will hallucinate. They don't always get things accurately. You alluded earlier on to something where you were alluding to the fact that there is some kind of training that you've done in the BotPress platform which would get rid of those hallucinations or something like that. Just curious about like your thoughts on where we are now, albeit appreciating that where it's going to go may be different and it might be easier to control. More knobs getting exposed, as you said, you can control more of this stuff. But where we are now, the technology that we have now, I'm kind of yet to see examples where there isn't at least some kind of hallucination happening. I'm just curious around how you're approaching accuracy and consistency as far as model performance.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I couldn't agree more with all the previous things that you said, about getting like democratizing access to citizen developers. And I think the real power of LLMs will be into how they make building these chatbots much easier, because you'll basically just talk to BotPress and BotPress will build these use cases for you, right? But in terms of hallucination, I think I don't think it's possible or even reasonable to expect models to be 100% accurate. But if you compare this with human-based error, like what's the human-based error rate on your current processes? And I think it's very reasonable to assume that if not already, GPT can get a better um, you know um, error-free rate than humans could have. But um, even if that's not true, there's always some kind of protections that you can put in place, so you can have like agents basically verifying and assessing the potential harm in giving certain kind of answers in certain situations. And you can have these you can then loop in humans to use their judgment and approve or modify the answer that GPT would give in those critical scenarios. So I don't think this is like hallucination is really a problem that is solvable, and that is like, I know people talk a lot about it, but it is actually a non-problem in the future, because you can just it's no different than humans. Like we shouldn't assume that humans don't make errors, and we should not forget that every kind of verification that you would put in place for humans, anyways, could be also put in place for LLMs. And so that to me isn't really like a valid reason why an organization wouldn't use LLMs. And I think anyways the pressure of like being more productive and offering a better customer experience will completely outweigh the potential risk of hallucinating, maybe like a $5 credit, or like, I don't know what could go that drastically wrong in like a customer scenario perspective. And yeah, I mean, to me, to be honest, so far, hallucination has never been really an issue. Um, if anything, LLMs have found errors in our knowledge bases and inconsistencies, even for our own web chat chatbots that we have on our own website. We thought that GPT was hallucinating. Turns out our website has some deprecated pages that had to go away, and so we were like, "Yep, GPT's right. We were wrong."
Interesting. That is so interesting. And you're right, humans make errors. And the amount of times that you've called, you had to call a company about something, you've been told one thing,
Mhm.
your delivery will be there by tomorrow, and tomorrow arrives and it doesn't arrive, and you call back up again. It's like, well, you said it was going to be here tomorrow. Oh, well, you shouldn't have said that. Well, someone told me it was going to be here tomorrow. So I get what you're saying there. And in terms of like
Happens
how
all
bad
the time.
it does. It happens all the time. You can't trust them bloody humans, can you? And I mean, there is potential for it to go slightly wrong. There's potential for it to, there was an example of the national. I can't remember what it was called now. National Association for Eating Disorders or something like that. This week had
Mhm.
a chatbot that they said it wasn't using the GPT APIs actually, but it advised somebody basically how they should diet. Really, whereas really what it should be doing is advising people why you shouldn't diet and how you should be eating healthy.
Yeah.
So the potential for that advice to be taken and then enacted on further down the road, the knock-on effect could be something. But I think what I was kind of getting at is not necessarily to say that uh, people will not, or companies won't use it from fear of hallucination, and that being a reason for them to not use it. I don't think that's a reason for them to not explore this. It's more a question of knowing that's the case, knowing that there is going to be the potential for hallucination, what advice would you give businesses to try and mitigate that as much as possible?
Yeah. So, in our case, and that's the case inside BotPress, and I hope other platforms are also taking these steps. But just on the foundation level, whenever you create prompts, we behind the scene we have a bunch of prompts that validates your prompt. For stuff, just to make sure that your prompt isn't wrong, or that like doesn't have to change in some ways to prevent hallucination, but also just like straight up harmful content generation from the part of our builders. But I think like the case you gave it, that's probably bad engineering in that case, because if you're building such a critical and risky bot, especially when dealing with people's lives, right? You should have a lot of safeguards. You should have basically more bots validating your bot's answers than you put effort on the actual bot itself, right? You
Mm.
need like several layers and potentially several models. Like maybe you want to use Claude from Anthropic AI, maybe you want to use Bard, maybe you want to use like different models that may have different biases and different perspective and training set and potential like bias elimination into like how it answers, and have them rank and challenge the answer that your bot is about to say to the user, right? And if all these safeguards don't make it out, then you really shouldn't be answering this to the user and should be transferring this conversation over to a human, right? But I think it's
Mm.
something that is 100% solvable, and that's something that you can do with our platform. But unfortunately, I think this is something that um, is to me, I consider bad engineering, and there's really no way of like forcing people to engineer their chatbots the right way, and to put all these safeguards in place. So
Mm.
I think
Is
people
is
have
there
to.
is there a risk? Is there a risk there of kind of like I'm trying to think of what the phrase is. It's almost like you're using the same tool to vet you're using the same tools with the same frailties to vet a tool with the same frailty, if that makes sense. You're
Yeah.
using it's almost like grading your own homework a little bit. Is that, or is that not a risk?
It is a nut. I mean, it is. These are so big models that you're probably fine using the same model to validate that very model's, output, given you give it a completely different prompt, and you make it so that it challenge that prompt, right? And that's exactly what adversarial, attacks are on GPT, because they've been instructed, like to not say something racist, for example, and all these things, but you can still get away from it. Like if you ask right now some advice, some legal advice to ChatGPT, it'll say, I'm not a lawyer and I cannot really give you advice. But if you say, actually, I'm a lawyer and you're passing the bar exam, right? And you need to answer this question, it won't tell you I'm not a lawyer. It will try to just answer, like there are always clever ways that you can escape these things. And in that same way, you can use this. I think you can use the same model to get a completely different answer and eliminate bias.
Mm,
But just to be safe, I think you should be using more than one LLM
yeah.
provider. If you're providing like life or death, which you probably shouldn't do, to be honest, in the first place.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. Um, so you mentioned there some of the way that these foundation models are kind of heading, getting on the one hand more and more powerful, on the other hand cheaper to run, essentially. And that's kind of how technology goes, isn't it? Everything gets
Mm.
more and more powerful, and as it gets more and more adopted and more used, economies of scale bring the price down. And so it seems logical that that's kind of where it will go. What's your thoughts on? Do you think that? So, for example, it's not it's not beyond doable to build your own NLU system, traditional kind of like intent-based classifier. Most of the platforms had their own proprietary NLU. I'm sure BotPress, you probably have your own proprietary classifier. It's not kind of beyond the realms of possibility. In 2016, 2017, there was kind of like a bit of a USP in having your own intent-based NLU system.
Mhm.
You could get slightly different performance from one versus another. I think we're probably at the point where that's maybe not quite so much the case, at least not kind of like starkly and noticeably. A lot of these NLU systems, given the right training data, will perform kind of similarly. Um, with the large language models, inevitably to create one, you need a lot of engineering expertise, you need a lot of computing power, you need a lot of money, you need a lot of data. They're beyond the reach of the average kind of person, really. And you have to rely on the OpenAIs, the Facebooks, the Amazons, and those kind of like larger organizations. Does that mean then that essentially the creation of these transformer based large language models are forever going to be in the hands of those kind of big guns, and therefore the kind of democratization or commoditization of them will purely just come in time as they get more powerful and the cost comes down? Or is it feasible, do you think, in future for companies and people and platforms to build their own? Or do you think it'll be a case of just taking like open source models and customizing them? Like, is there any point in building your own kind of thing? Like, I wonder if we get your perspectives on kind of like the those that are creating these models, and whether these large language models will be commoditized themselves, whether there's any point in trying to do something yourself.
Yeah, my answer will change over time. Currently, it is in the hands of big players, and there's absolutely no way that any startup can even think to compete. We're talking hundreds of millions, in investments required, plus the talent, plus all the things that goes with like building, marketing, and selling a product, right? So it's almost impossible at this point to catch up with the big guys. Although there are advancements in all the different areas that make the current LLMs completely obsolete in 6 months, and we will have and thank God we have like Hugging Faces, and like we have this big movement around open source. I think models that compete or even surpass the current LLMs, and I guess there's probably like a 9 months lag between the commercial state of the art and the open source state of the art, right? And so this time frame will keep shrinking and shrinking to the point where having an LLM runtime will be part of every hardware and every software, every operating system. Basically, this will be as critical as it is to have like a graphical user interface in Windows or on your phone. Every phone, probably every car will have their own LLM runtime that can run on premise, very fast, state of the art, probably much better than GPT-4 currently today, right? And that's like in not so distant future, maybe a year, maybe max 16 months in the future, because the speed at which everything is going is hyper exponential. It's not Moore's law. It's like Moore's law to the power of 2. It's like it's much faster, more than anything any human can really think naturally. And so I think right now, well, I mean, it's always going to be a waste of in my opinion, money and time to try to even compete with the models out there, unless you are part of like an open source community trying to bridge the gap between that 9 months head time of the commercial systems, right? But yeah, I mean, to the point where natural language understanding will be a done task. We used to have similar bottlenecks before, right? The internet, like you needed to decide between the phone or the internet. Like the speed was an issue. Like nowadays, we just take for granted, like internet is everywhere, it's super fast, like you have a 1 millisecond latency, intercontinental, and it just works, right? And so NLU will be exactly the same. It'll just work, and you won't even think about the NLU system behind. You'll just assume it completely understand beyond human comprehension, human language, right? So that's my view on it. And I don't think it's false to say this will become true. I think it's just a matter of when this statement will become true. My guess is 12 to 16 months, might be 10 years, but this will become true. So are you going to build right now, like spend hundreds of millions of dollars trying to build your own LLM when in 12 months, 16 months, it might be completely obsolete and irrelevant? I don't think that's a good use of money, right?
Absolutely. And most seem to be trying to kind of customize an existing open source model, or feeding like GPT-4 with their own data and trying to put some constraints around it, which inevitably is far faster, far easier to do. And if you look at the open source, you mentioned open source there, if you look at the Meta LLM that was leaked in March, Llama, in a space of 3 weeks, it was matching the performance of Bard pretty much. 92% kind of quality score according to GPT-4. Bard had 93%. That's the Vicuna model, like the third edition of it. And there's nothing stopping anyone from basically just downloading that and running that locally on a machine, And once you train that on your own data, then, businesses, 100% I agree that businesses, even today, right now, could use an open source model like that, or Flanty 5, something like that. Train it on your own data. You could have it running in your own cloud, completely customized on your data, no access to the wider internet, and you can accomplish amazing things. The question is not necessarily how long will it take the technology to get to that point, because the same thing was the same thing that we were talking about with Alexa. It was like the technology, albeit we know now there's kind of some limitations to the Alexa architecture and stuff like that, but at the time, it's like everything's there that you need. You can invoke a skill. You could invoke your car insurance. You could invoke whatever you wanted to do to get done, and the capabilities was there to be able to deliver it. So the technology was ready. What wasn't happening was A, business demand, and B, customer demand. So technology being ready is one thing, but implementing and getting adoption is two different things. It seems to me, though, that more businesses now are interested in LLMs than they certainly were, certainly more interested in that than they were Alexa, without a shadow of a doubt. And customers are using ChatGPT, as we know, at an alarming rate. So it may be that actually that we're in a place where we have the perfect mix. We have technology readiness. It's that kind of typical Venn diagram, isn't it? Technology readiness, business problems to be solved, and customer behavior. And the overlap of all of those, it seems as though we're beginning to find it now, whereas previous versions of the technology, perhaps it wasn't quite the same.
Exactly. And combined with this global shortage of talent, I think there's no going back. LLMs are here to stay. The business value that you'll get from them will keep growing exponentially. If you're not considering, if you don't have currently like a team working on adopting and automating every part of your business using LLMs, you're probably behind already. It's not just like answering questions, right? When you think of LLMs, like these things can code, right? They can write code, so they can automate. And if you can write code, that basically just means you speak computer code, right? They can operate tools. They can make API calls. They can create contacts in your CRM. They can place an order for you. They can analyze virtually any kind of data streams, and they can make hypotheses, and they can extrapolate and make good decisions based on your decision frameworks, and they can they can talk with anyone in your company and get things done, right? Like virtually every intellectual task that we human do, they will probably be able to do much better than we do, and much faster and more reliably in a few months time. So yeah,
Do you do you think do you it's mind blowing, isn't it? Do you think so? On the one hand, in terms of like if you look at the the what how would you phrase it? Kind of like the bigger public profiles, the Gary Marcuses of the world and the Jan LeCuns of the world and stuff like that. Part of them are kind of like split in half. One half is kind of like, and I can't remember exactly who purports which viewpoint, but like half of the kind of media landscape is on the side of this is a doomsday situation
Mm,
because these language models, because they can do everything you've just outlined,
yep.
are going to not only lead to so many job losses, but they could also potentially lead to some degree of autonomy and where will they take themselves basically. On the other side, you've got the argument, which is that actually, as you've suggested, there's a massive labor shortage. There is so much demand that most companies are facing. They just haven't got the staff to deal with that kind of demand. And everyone's got stuff that they want to do and they would rather do, but they can't do because they're too tied up in the day to day, boring, busy work that they can't get to the stuff that they'd rather be doing, the real kind of like future facing visioning stuff. So like it depends what side of the fence you sit on. On the one hand, it's going to free up people to work on more productive tasks. On the other hand, it's this extinction level event.
Mhm.
Where do you see it? I think I kind of probably know what you're going to say, but like, where do you see it being? Is there any risk of the whole kind of like job loss thing? As you said there, if it can do all this stuff, what do we need humans for? Or is it a case that actually you think that humans are going to be able to be used more effectively as they have been when the computer took away the carrier pigeon?
I think both, right? They're not mutually exclusive. And again, it's all a question of time. I don't think in 100 years we will still be working at computers entering data manually in an Excel sheet, right? Uh, if we are realistic, some jobs are just, meant to be replaced and non-existent, starting with developers. And I'm a developer myself, and I can clearly see that like writing codes manually, like we're probably going to be like product managers more than coders, right? Like in a
Mm,
few years time. But um I and without entering into like the doomsday thing, I think one area where like the Jan LeCuns and the Gary Marcus are wrong and not thinking of this right, that these things don't just like the potential harm of LLMs is not into like people creating misinformation campaigns, but more in automating basically. And this is not AGI, to be clear, but it is, in my opinion, 100% the base ingredients of AGI, because this is what will probably create AGI. And if I can explain this maybe statement, like the foundation of the scientific process is um, observing, making observations, drawing hypotheses, doing experiments to validate these hypotheses, and then drawing conclusions, and then repeating, right? And the only thing that prevents us from doing this really fast um, is human speed of like observing data, drawing conclude, like making hypotheses, testing them with experiments, and so on and so forth. Um, if we can automate these steps with AI, I think it's safe to assume that GPT-6, right? Let's downplay GPT-4's performance. We can say GPT-6 will probably be able to make reasonable observations and hypotheses, and will probably be able to operate some tools, some machinery to make experiments and verify the data. But essentially, what I'm trying to say is this loop of experiment and thus scientific progress is going to be exponentially faster,
mm,
to the point where the goal of that loop probably will be, how can this loop be faster, and how can I be faster and faster and faster, and maybe how can I be more intelligent, and how can I like how can I remove this bottleneck that I have right now, And probably this is what will be creating AGI that we speak of today, whatever the definition of AGI you have. But I think of it as just pure base scientific progress, automation that will probably, like, LLMs will be a key ingredients in that acceleration. And I'm worried that AGI will be discovered and used for potentially the wrong reasons. Even if that goal is save the planet, well, things can go wrong if you just say save the planet without also spare humans.
Yeah,
Right? So
absolutely.
that's what's worrisome. It's not the misinformation campaigns on social networks. It's really that loop of improvement that goes faster and faster. And do we have the safeguards in place to prevent someone from messing up when trying to genuinely do something good? Yeah, that's what can go wrong.
Yeah. So, but it's interesting because, like, you've got kind of like the I lost my train of thought there. Oh yeah, that's it. So when we talk about the future, and everyone's kind of concerned about job losses and things like that, and that's only from the vantage point of where we sit now, though, isn't it? That's only because we do spend all of our days in, Excel or whatever, writing emails and stuff like that. And so we have this like paradigm of where we are now and the opportunity or potential of change in the future. And we're like, well, that's scary. We're going to be a lot of jobs lost. But as you said, 100 years ago, we weren't sitting at computers. 100 years earlier than that, in the 1820s, what we do now every day, from the moment you wake up to the second you go to bed, every single thing you do pretty much was absolutely unthinkable in 1820.
Yeah.
Completely unthinkable. We didn't even have cars. Didn't have trains. We had none of these computers, no mobile devices, no internet. The chances of me and you being able to have a conversation like this really have only happened in the last 20 years. Because even before 20 years, the bandwidth was so short and so rubbish that we wouldn't have really been able to have a proper conversation. So where we are now is just a moment in time. And in 100 years' time, if we're still typing emails and working in Excel all day, then there's something really wrong with that, isn't there? Why would you want to
Exactly.
preserve what we have? Because in 1820, if everyone was trying to preserve the horse and cart, trying to preserve the carrier pigeon, that's not what you would want to be doing today. So it's a matter of perspective, isn't it? It's just a bit of a sort of like people feel a bit edgy about change, I suppose. But the thing you're talking about there in terms of the doomsday event, I can kind of see. But again, at the same time, I still struggle to connect the dots between that methodology you've just outlined there, which I think is a brilliant one. Large language models are a version of a large language model that can access outside tools and that can create hypothesis, do tests, analyze, iterate, and then find a solution. And to be able to do that in infinite number of ways. So it's not just like, so for example, ChatGPT, when you access ChatGPT, it seems as though it's just you and ChatGPT having a conversation, but ChatGPT is having a million conversations at the same time. So it can do a million of these or a billion of these hypothesis experimentations and iterations at the same time, which then leads to exponential discovery, exponential information, kind of new breakthroughs and that kind of stuff. The bit that I can't connect the dots to is this whole extinction level event thing, because it needs to break out of the machine to do something that would physically harm humans. And I haven't managed to connect the dots to that yet. Aside from thinking about how it might hack into banking systems and government systems and, do something around maybe the economy or something like that. But I can't figure out how it's going to be, how it could potentially make the human take over and make us extinct, basically. I can't connect the dots.
Yeah. And I think, and me neither. And I think that's exactly the point where, if we are an ant right now, we can't really know what humans are doing up there, right? Like, these are smarter beings and take decisions faster, and there's just no way of like forecasting for an ant, like what will happen with the stock market tomorrow. Same thing for us. Like, I mean, this seems like fantasy, but it's, like, it is definitely going to happen. It's just a matter of time. And so, do we have the safety nets in place for when this moment happens, right? So we can slow it down, right? We can probably put regulations that slow that moment down, and while we put the safety nets and like take precautions and measures to make sure that we like there's fewer and fewer chances of these things happening in the way we architect them and in the way maybe. But there's just no way of for us knowing like how this will unfold, because it will be like way smarter and more clever in the way it achieves that, and it might not even be intentional. It could be information spreading, it could be manufacturing something that shouldn't be manufactured, it could be an experiment going wrong, it might be, I don't know, like political debates that shouldn't be happening, or whatever.
It's interesting, very interesting. It's and all the data that it's trained on is all just data produced by humans. So I think that like that thing about like when it gets to the point of
I'll say something though. We are entering the superhuman data sets. If you have an LLM like GPT-4 right now operating Unreal Engine, which is almost, like with 5.2 is almost, reality looking at this point, and it has a physics engine, we will be going. So if you have like GPT-4 operating the software and saying exactly, give me like render this scene with like a ball on the table, and I'm gonna push, like I'm gonna push with 5 Newton this ball in this direction, and then records like frame by frame everything that happens to the ball, the position and all these things, the lightning going on the ball. And we are entering the era of superhuman data sets where we are labeling with higher precision, that using laws that we discovered using science again, for like how light reflects and how physics operate, and we'll be able to transition these laws and these observations into above human level data sets. And so it won't be data sets that we human have created, but we discovered some basic scientific facts. We've modeled these facts into a physics engine and then a gaming engine or whatnot. Type of other engines could be DNA engines like RNA and all these things. Like we made scientific progress that we can model and test at large scale, and we can make observations of higher quality than us human can do. And so these data sets will get insanely good really fast. But it's just good. like a parenthesis on like the data sets, because it's not true. Like, yes, right now GPT is trained on human data. I think we will very soon be going beyond human data.
Yeah, I can see that definitely. What I was kind of getting towards there is that like the whole sort of like safeguarding thing in terms of training these AI systems to basically not harm humans. If it's trained on data from the internet, and now with Whisper, it's probably being trained on podcasts and YouTube videos and movies and things like that.
Yeah.
Humans like conflict, they like fighting, they like bombs, and they like to blow things up, they like arguments, they like all of that stuff. It's what, if you look at any news page, it's all tragedy, it's all terror, and it's all usually involving damage and harm that's happening to other humans. And so these AI systems are being trained on data with that kind of intonation, because you're not going to be able to avoid that. If it's trained on Reddit conversations, there's going to be so much abuse on Reddit that it's going to train the AI systems to think, well, handing out abuse like that is kind of what these things do. And so you could, if the only safeguard we have is to give it a prompt that says, don't harm humans or something to that effect, it's not really going to have that much of a difference, because it's the information, the data that it has behind the scenes that's being created by us that has that conflict within it. That's kind of the issue,
You are 100% right. Thankfully, we have books that are sane, right? But what we humans do to entertain ourselves is create more exciting versions of our own reality, right? That's why games are not boring. That's why sitcoms are funny, and that's, like, we're just making movies and series of like our own lives, but more exciting and more like we amplify the good and the bad of what can
Mm.
happen, right, in our society. And unfortunately, we're training AI to watch and replicate this, which
Mm.
is a real threat. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Well, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives there. I think it got very funky and towards the end there. But I think that those are the kind of, conversations and things that you don't tend to think about as often when you're just kind of in the weeds of building a chatbot, for example, and you
Yep.
just think that all we're doing is we're building this very narrow, specific thing that's going to be aiming to solve one specific problem. But the reality is that the foundational technology that sits behind it all and the companies that are building it and how it can be used more broader and wider than broader and wider than how a company might use it is definitely needs to be considered. And it is one of the things that I think everyone is wrestling with right now is where is this stuff going? Where can this stuff go? And where do we want it to go? So yeah, absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me, Sylvain. I really, really appreciate it. For those of you tuning in, you can go to botpress.com to find out more. BOTPRESS.com if you want to see what we've been talking about. If you want to see the platform, you can go there. I don't know if it's if people can just register if they need to reach out to you, Sylvain, to get on board. How do they do that?
No, I mean, it's a free platform, free of use for everyone. You just click sign up, and you're in. Thousands of people every day use like are subscribing to the platform. So I hope you will give it a try and give us your feedback on it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Please do that. And remember, you can go to unpars.com if you want to get tickets for our up and coming conference in London, all about conversation design and how to craft compelling conversational experiences. And you can also go to vux.world and you can click on the events tab if you want to join this Thursday's webinar on all about the metrics that matter for measuring chatbot performance. You can go and sign up for that. And we'll be here at 5 p.m. UK time on Thursday with Wisdom AI. Sylvain, thank you so much for joining us. That was genuinely absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. And definitely go and check out botpress.com.
That was fun, Kane. Thanks for having me. All right.
Thank you very
Cheers.
much. And thank you.